Hello, I'm Paul Cowling with Film Independent, and welcome to another Tuesday night Film Independent member event. Tonight, it's all about producing and finding and developing material. We have a fantastic panel joining us, and I will do my introductions alphabetically. First up, he's the producer of Short Term 12, Buena Vista Social Club, Adios, and Just Mercy. Asher Goldstein, step up. Hey, Asher, how are you?
I was bad on my entrance, but here we are.
That's okay.
Nice to be here.
How are you doing?
Good. How are things wherever you are in Los Angeles?
I'm in Sherman Oaks. It's been a chilly day, but I've stayed indoors again, another day inside. Whereabouts are you?
We're over in Silver Lake.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. Next up, he is a Spirit Award winning producer. His credits include Screwdriver, The Sweet Requiem, It Felt Like Love, and Beach Rats. It Felt Like Love is John Cassavetes' nominee, by the way. And Beach Rats, both for Eliza Hittman. His directorial debut, 1,000 Rupee Note, won over 30 awards. And as I said, he won the Producers Award at the Spirit Awards in 2019. Shrihari Sathe is with us. Shrihari, do you want to step up on stage? How are you doing?
Hi, Paul. Hi, Asher.
How are you?
Good.
Where are you joining us from?
Hey.
I am calling in from Brooklyn.
Okay.
So it's 8:30.
Thanks for staying up late.
Post dinner. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Next up, she's the producer of Maine, Adult World, Keep the Change, and Little Accidents. She also won the Producers Award at the Film Independent Spirit Awards in 2018, the year before Shrihari. Summer Shelton is with us. Hey, Summer.
Hi. Hello.
How are you?
Great. Greetings from Knoxville, Tennessee.
I was going to say, I wondered if you were in Tennessee. How's it there?
It's fun, isolating, and just, taking it one day at a time.
Like all of us, yeah. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Again,
Thank you.
Staying up a bit later than everyone else here on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And then our moderator today, his credits include I Am Not a Hipster and Short Term 12 as well as Asher. Most recently, he produced the indie pilots The Dream and Pretend Partners. Both were selected for South by Southwest 2020 and 2021. So we're seen virtually. It's good to welcome our good friend Ron Najor. Hey, Ron.
Hey, Paul. Hi, everybody.
How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us. Where are you joining us from?
I'm actually in San Diego, California.
Okay, cool. So is it chilly down there as well as it is in LA?
It is, it is actually very chilly, but not too bad.
A freezing cold 60 degrees in LA. We always complain about 60 degrees being freezing.
New York was 67 today. So it's unseasonably warm. Yeah.
That is warm. We were also expecting Haraya Mohammed to join us, but unfortunately something came up for her. So she sent her apologies. We will ask her back soon for another panel, but for now, it's all working out for her. So the way this is going to work, we'll do about an hour of conversation. I'm going to step off this virtual stage and hand over to Ron to take over. We do have a Q&A button at the bottom, so you can submit your questions and upvote the popular ones. And I'm just going to be waiting in the wings, listening in. So take it away, Ron.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to my panelists for doing this. It's very generous of you to give your time. And I'm actually just going to hop right into it. And ask my first question, and I'll sort of call it around the room for this very first question. So my first question is, in the past year, what did producing look like for you, and how did your focus priorities shift? I know it's been a very, very intriguing year for all of us. So maybe we'll start with Shrihari.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, last year was pretty strange for everyone. For me, it was a few different things. Very luckily, I wrapped international co-production that filmed in India, Australia, and New York, literally a week before the global shutdown happened. Our last day of shooting was in Australia, and we finished that. So most of my year was kind of managing the post-production on that film, which was happening between Bangladesh and India. And I'm here in New York. So it was kind of primarily coordinating with the editors and working through that. And I had a sort of a start-stop production that almost went 4 times last year. So a lot of it went to trying to keep it current in terms of the COVID protocols and just set safety and just our financing came through, and then the stock market crashed and like half of the financiers dropped out to rebuild the financing. So I spent most of the last year trying to get that project up and running until, lo and behold, towards the end of the year, the television shows my actors were on decided not to release them till next year, which is 2021. So that the decision was made for me that that movie was not happening last year. So a lot of energy kind of went into a project that was supposed to shoot multiple times last year and it didn't end up shooting. And I also spent most of the time kind of taking stock on the kind of movies I wanted to continue making, and the marketplace was changing rapidly. And as Asher, you and Summer all know, that it's hard to kind of make a living just doing sub-$1 million movies. So I've just been trying to figure out how to scale up in my productions, but also trying to find a way into television, which, as primarily being a producer who produces only indie fiction features, I'm trying to branch out into doing documentary and television as well. So I spend a lot of time trying to focus on learning how to develop like long form content, how to develop like narrative arcs within nonfiction worlds. So I think when you asked me to join in this panel, I was like, I'm eager to learn from my fellow panelists and you as much as I can give my information.
I think that's one of the great things about these talks for me is like, sometimes it's just about me wanting to learn and ask questions. And people are thinking like, you're the moderator. I'm like, yeah, but I want to learn from these great group of producers that I'm assembling to talk to. And so with that, Summer, would you like to take that question?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a wild year. It's been at first like scary, depressing, frightening, and then introspective and inspiring. I think that would be like my journey of it. Like, at first, it was just very depressing and scary to me to not know where I was, because I was kind of in a situation where, you know, most of my films were wrapped and out in the world pre-COVID. And like I was actually in development for about, 6 to 12 months before COVID. So in terms of my producing cycle, I try to be more diverse in terms of like have one going, have one wrapping, But life just led all of my work to like be wrapped and done. And I was starting from scratch. So everything that I was developing was getting like momentum. I was in a stage of a little concept on a documentary that got some momentum, and, a narrative feature that's a much bigger project that was getting some casting momentum and things. And then, another project I had, working with the director, getting the rights to certain things and putting it together. And then pandemic hit, and it's just like, I have no idea when any of when is the fruits of my labor ever going to grow so that I can eat those fruits. So that got a little scary. So I took a lot of stock in my work and my life and my career, and I decided to take control of it. And like Shrihari says, like, what kind of movies do you want to make and what stories do you want to tell? And kind of made some bold decisions of my own of what I wanted to do, and started curating material that I was interested in, rather than, having material come to me or directors come to me. I really just started to be aggressive of like, these are the stories that I want to tell. And I took stock of like, well, what are the skills and talents that I have that I wasn't using, because I think we have a lot of, and I asked myself the question, what would you tell your best friend if they were having this career crisis? And what would you tell your students? Because I do a lot of like teaching online or mentoring a lot of emerging filmmakers. And I would say to them, hey, what you got that you ain't using, And so I had to kind of a hard look at myself and think like, okay, what are the talents that you have that you're not using? And, I'm just making some personal steps to capitalize on those and use it to tell stories I want to tell, and just go for it. Just don't hold back. That's been my post-it for the latter half of the pandemic, where the first half was just like, just hold on. So
totally understandable. Asher?
Yeah, I mean, look, I just touching on like two things, I think just worth kind of highlighting of stuff that's been said. First off, I think it's really important that we all talk, right? Like, I know you were mentioning like in the context of the panel, but I really think it's so important to sort of say this out loud. It's like, wherever you are at in your career, it's really good to have people around you. Like, a word I throw around a lot, or words I throw around lately, are peer mentoring. Like an hour ago, I was on the phone with another producer, friend of probably all of ours. And she was giving me some insight into something that I had a question about, and it's like, I hope that I continue having those questions throughout my career, right? Like, I feel like that's the fun part about our job. Mm-hmm. So I really think that's important. And then the other thing I think is important is hearing basically a similar answer from both Shri and from Summer is this whole idea of taking stock. The other thing that I really like focused on, which I think helps my work, is just really our space in our brain, like figuring out ways to create really healthy pathways for us to think about, whether it's ourselves or our work or how we're accomplishing things or whatever else. Like, I really think that, I said this recently and I did an interview with Dear Producer, and I said this to Rebecca Green, that it's like, it's like whether you're running or you're doing mindfulness meditation or you're listening to the Headspace app or you're talking to your close friend, Ron Najor, it's important to do that. But in terms of the year, honestly, like, I had a really, I was very fortunate to have a film that came out at the beginning of January, end of December last year in 2019, 2020. And we had just really started wrapping up our theatrical release when everything got shut down. And we also had a little bit of a really interesting life with the film, that it got re-released later in the year in connection to a lot of the protests that were going on post the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery killings. And I was really happy to see that film like land in the way it did in such a way. And so I had I was luckily, that was just mercy, is I had a really, grateful year to that extent, that we were able to make something of worth, and then it was able to find an audience and speak to people, so like I had the rare ability to be really grateful in that capacity last year. But, I was planning on developing. So I was planning on being at home, reading and making phone calls and doing notes. Like, that was my plan. I wasn't planning on it being so definitively true when I said it at the beginning of 2020. But yeah, it's been an interesting one for sure.
I think that's something I forgot to mention, was the focus on myself outside of my work, which I did and was important. And I found that once I did that my creativity and inspiration, was much more bountiful and twofold. Like, I committed to, the only thing I could do here is just walk. So I would walk, 5 miles a day, just walk and think. And I felt better and my brain was working. And I noticed that after a while, as I was walking, I would just start writing, like literally on my phone, which is something I never do. Like, I'm not technology. It's like, how do people walk and do this? But I was just so like, I was like, I can't forget this. But it was just like, it's interesting because I think as producers, we have the habit martyring our lives for our work and our collaborators, our writers, our directors. And I think that sometimes you forget, well, how do you unclog your own pipes to keep the brains moving? And you got to like do that. And I felt like that was kind of like I call it like a silver lining of the pandemic was, you know, to take stock of, you know, your life. Like years ago, I wrote something for Dear Producer and it called Produce Your Life Like You Produce Your Films. And I felt so hypocritical when I took stock of myself before the pandemic. I was like, Summer, get yourself together. So I got out and did it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're kind of, for me, it was like in New York when the cases were rising pretty rapidly. And even in the summer, actually, where I live, most people leave the neighborhood to go to work, but now everyone was home. So the streets were more crowded than they normally are because everyone was taking walks. So I just kind of found myself like going out at very odd hours, mostly at night to kind of get some air. But most of fall, I actually ended up watching a lot of movies. This year, I'm the guest curator at the Portland International Film Festival. Oh. So I curated all the international films for the festival. Wow. So I just spent a lot of time watching movies from 2019 and 2020 that really helped reinvigorate my passion for movies because it's something that I really missed. You know, I miss watching movies. And now here I had an opportunity to watch the kind of the best the industry has to offer, and just seeing the cinema from different countries and looking at like different styles and the stories that people are telling from their own communities is the cinema that I'm most interested in, you know, and it really gave me kind of a shot in the arm to continue, you know, making the kind of movies I wanted to make. And it was really great to have that boost, especially when I was pretty down and out, not being able to set up a movie that I was really trying hard to put together. Right. So it was just kind of a good way to kind of be at peace with it.
Right. You know, it's funny, as in the spirit of this conversation, I'm just treating this like we're having a conference call or like a catch up. But like one of the things that comes to mind, you know, based on what you're saying, Shri, is like with because there's a lot of conversation about streaming and how it's going to destroy us all, and that might be true and it might not be. But I do think that the focus on finding local language producers is going to be even more so. And like being someone who has a desire to tell stories from different places could be there could be an entry point there, right? Like, and I feel like that's it's, you know, in sort of like taking stock, right, of what we're good at and what we're interested in, you know, perhaps there's an opportunity in doing that too, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, it's like, you know, even at the studio level, right? Like Sony makes local language movies for various territories. And granted, they might be working with local producers, but boy, would they probably, I'm guessing, be really excited if there was someone that was a little little closer to them that they could work with. Like, I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm just saying, I think that comes to mind, right? As we're talking.
Well, let me ask you guys this. What has something in this past year happened as producers in terms of that you think has been a positive spin in terms of something that you might not have thought about in terms of developing your material and working with your material, if anybody wants to take that?
I missed the question because my internet connection sucks.
I can take that. I mean, I think one of the things that surprised me was that I could be in Cannes, I could be in Berlin, I could be in Sundance without having to spend loads of money by just being available through the online marketplaces. And that was pretty amazing. I mean, as much as I'm a festival hopper and used to be a person who went from festival and market to market, but it was really nice to be able to link up with producers and directors and writers through my network, literally from the comfort of my home. And I really enjoyed that because that just meant that I was saving more for my retirement instead of spending it on airfare and hotels and going to parties. So I thought that really surprised me was was, okay, there is a little bit of a silver lining to not being able to travel because you can save more. And I thought that was quite interesting. Mm-hmm. One of the things that for me was really great was at the Marché du Film last year. I was on the hunt for a producer from France for a project, and I got contacted by a French producer who wanted me to come on their project. It didn't end up working out, and they ended up coming on my project. So it kind of worked out pretty amazing, like just having sort of the space to network with people. I mean, it's really nice to be able to meet in person, but I think there's a way to maximize, especially for emerging producers. Most of these markets have reduced their badges, the cost of registration. So it's a really good way to kind of get into the international marketplace right now from just being in your home.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you all this, like in terms of, because there's probably some writers in the audience that would love to connect with producers such as yourselves. Like what's a way that you all find your material? And maybe if you could talk about how writers in the audience could connect to somebody like yourself or someone similar to you.
I think this is the hard part, right? I'm gonna give the disclaimer, then I'll give the hope. The disclaimer part is that it's hard to cold get into things with people. I think a lot of folks that are watching this know this, like, you know, the issue is with unsolicited material. No one wants to take someone's material and read it and then be liable if something happens later on where they've made something in connection to that project. And so it's that, but there's also, I think, just the sheer reality that I'm positive that all of us have stuff in our inboxes that we feel so guilty for having not gotten to yet that it's impossible. So we're not like also like just dying to like feel guiltier, but the truth is that and so that's the disclaimer. So it's tricky. This is tricky to get it into like, say, like you're probably not going to cold call Summer and say, Summer, I'm going to cold send you a script. You don't know me. It's probably not going to work. Okay. So that's the disclaimer. The more hopeful part is that I say this, and it's not to blow smoke, but quite literally one of the places that I look to find stuff is when Film Independent, you know, makes an announcement that says, these are my lab, these are not mine, but our lab participants. You know, these are the projects. These are the, or there's all of these different, whether it's the Nichols Fellowship or at least, the Imagine Impact Fellowship. Like there's a lot of these programs and workshops that just have people's that are getting aggregated through them. And we all pay attention to that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, getting yourself involved with your project with Film Independent, with the Sundance Institute, with IFP in New York, with the San Francisco Film Society, with all of these different organizations is incredibly helpful because they help us sort through stuff. They help the business sort through stuff. They help agents and managers sort through stuff. So, the Film Independent, membership and the access that it provides, I think, not to make it a commercial for Film Independent, but I think is vital, as someone who's starting out. Because if Paul calls me and says, hey, there's this young filmmaker I think you should meet, like, I'll take that person's phone call all of a sudden because it's gone through some sort of filter. And so I think that's it. Otherwise, for me, it's like, look, like I scour the internet, I scour the news. I get sent, book briefings where people are sending like little paragraphs of descriptions of books that are coming out. I get, I read the New York Times book section every weekend, agents and managers, like I said, lab programs, friends in my community. So there's stuff coming from a lot of places. I think one of the places that we end up looking is a lot of these days is for some sort of source material, because as independent producers, unfortunately, it is hard to get a leg up, to get to that next level. I'll shut up in a second. I'll stop rambling. But I think it is hard to get to that next step in terms of studio projects, i.e. things that are going to pay our rent, let alone a mortgage. I'm not even talking about that. Just pay your rent. And I unfortunately have seen a lot of folks not continue on with groups of people they're working with. Like that happens often. And so one of the ways as an independent producer that you can, get a leg up on that is getting material that's valuable, right? Finding a great book, finding a great short story. And not all those things need to be bestsellers, right? Sometimes it's just good to have something to say, hey, there's a full story here. And I'm big on original ideas. And if I could just make original ideas forever, that would be fine with me. But I do think that there's a real value you can have as a producer in control, not control, I don't say that in that way, like nefariously, but in having a handle on the material before everybody else gets involved. Because at the end of the day, that whole adage of content is king is true. If you have good material, you can take it pretty far, I think.
Yeah, I echo all that, and I'll just extend by like, I also find my material through people I'm inspired by and just want to work with, to be quite honest with you. Sometimes rather than going from the word out, and by word, I mean from the black and white on the page to the screen, I go the other way. I look at, who are people that have made things that I'm interested in collaborating with, but I also like to I'm a sucker for the underdog. I've tried to find the offbeaten thing that I'm like, man, what's this little nugget here? And why haven't they gotten this opportunity that like I see something special in them? And I say that even in terms of like with actors and talent and people, like I actually will go and, I'm not bashful to reach out to, actors or people and be like, hey, what are you interested in doing? I just think you're kind of special. And, I'm doing these type things. What are you interested in? Because I try to, it's definitely like in terms of getting stuff to me. Yes, I do. It is much easier to get to me through an introduction of somewhere else, just as a filter. And I advise people that are just starting out to maybe not only just focus your time on developing your material, but you need to put some stock in your relationships and your communication building, because, this business is about networking and, that who, and there's show and there's business, and business has a lot more letters in it than show. So you got to like know how to work it a little bit. So I try to curate relationships to then inspire material, to be quite honest with you. And it's about people that I want to work with, voices that I want to elevate, and just ask them, hey, what are you doing? And so that's one avenue that I take myself in terms of like to elevate other people's voices. And then now it's also, like finding original ideas and saying like, look, I want to do this and I think you'd be great at it. Would you want to do this with me? And that I've done recently. That's being very fruitful as well, to like curate my own kind of thing, so to speak, while helping other people do whatever thing they want to do.
To go with that,
I think that's really. Oh, sorry. Just to say, like, I think what Summer just said is like so critical, which is telling someone like in no uncertain words that you are committed to making something happen with them, that you're willing to go down that road with them, and not like give them the like, if X happens, then maybe I'll think about it. Like it goes a long way. Like just being really clear about wanting to work with someone is a great. It's a great way to start a relationship, to be honest.
Yeah. Really who doesn't like flattery?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Like, when usually do you all get involved? Is it is it after you read a first draft? Is it after the financing is secured? Is it on a pitch? If any of you want to explain on any projects, maybe like specifically how you came into being and what you prefer.
Mm-hmm. It varies. There's some projects that I've been hired because I come up through the ranks of like physical production and line producing. So a lot of people reached out to me like, boy, this girl actually knows how to make a movie and knows how to, save $1. So some people would hire me to produce things. Maybe they had the script and everything was ready. They just didn't know how to like execute it. So sometimes I'm hired, but, more often than not lately, when I'm curating my own projects, I do like to be involved early on in terms of the development. I prefer to come on projects when the artistic collaborators are willing to, you know, hear my thoughts and feelings, but they come to me with like, they know their foundation and they know the movie they want to make and they know the story they want to tell, but there's still a little, you know, malleable room to make the project executable and producible. And, you know, I'm not one that necessarily like, if someone brings me like a whole silver platter, like here's a movie, you want to produce it. Yeah, I'll think about it, 'cause I got to like put food on the table. But if I had my druthers, I would, you know, be like someone and be like, okay, let's sit down at this table together. Your script is the menu. Let's figure out how we're going to prepare the meal together, so to speak. You know, that's kind of the way that I like to do things, just to be involved. So I feel a little creatively attached. And, you know, it also just makes me emotionally connected to not just the material, but it gives me a window to build a relationship with my collaborators and get to know how they work and how their mind works, because I don't know how to support a writer or director if I don't know who they are and how they work. I need to like get in there with you, like show me your innards and let's figure out what's going on. So I like to kind of do that. But if you want to hire me and write me a check, you know, sure, let's talk.
Shrihari, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier in terms of sort of finding material or contacting people that you don't know. I'm a big fan of the double opt-in introduction method, which is where you don't blindly introduce someone. You first ask them for their permission if they're willing to get the introduction. And I find that saves time for everyone involved, because you're not making an introduction from a writer-director to another producer. If that producer is not looking for any material, it's a waste of everyone's time in terms of you having forced that producer to take that meeting. So the double opt-in allows you, as the mediator, to seek permission from the person who you're making the introduction to. I think it's also a good way for people who have a pretty small network to broaden their network is by asking people they know. Again, it's like, I think I always think of the Kevin Bacon game, the 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon, you know, like, I just keep thinking about that. And it's like, okay, who do I know? Who can make that intro for me? And if they can't, fine, no hard feelings. You know, I get people are busy. So then you move on to someone else who could make that intro.
Yeah.
I would say this is why I keep my Facebook account. It's like literally the only reason why I still have a Facebook account is so I could try to track people down when I need to.
Yeah.
But I do want to say one thing, because I think it's important, because I realize that some of the people watching this aren't going to necessarily like, you know, are starting out really. And in many ways, like we're all starting out too, right? Like we have a long path to forge. But the point I was going to make is, you know, whether you're a writer director, whether you're a producer, like find the people that are at your level. Like, yes. It's going to be great. Like stoked. Like if you're like, you know, if you're someone, you know, I also think it's good advice to be like, what movies do you love? Who made those movies? Who sold those movies? Like anything you need on a movie that you like look into it. Not everyone's going to be great, but like you could connect with those people. But I think the first thing is like, yo, like if you haven't made a movie before, like I'm sure there's a lot of feature directors that you want to work with if you're a younger producer or earlier in your career rather. But what about the short filmmakers? Like watch every single short film. You know what I mean? Like go and buy a ticket for the short film programs at South by, right? Like they program great shorts at South by, for instance, you know, so that's coming up. Like go do that. Like watch all those shorts, like see who made them. Like maybe one of those people like had a producer on it because they just needed someone and they are actually looking for a partner on something. So I really feel like the thing that I think is most missing this year that I'm so worried about film festivals and is just this, and Ron, you and I have spoken about this, is that tactile time we get to spend together where like ideally there would be a Q&A in a real life that we'd be doing this at, and someone out there would be sitting next to someone they don't know, but lo and behold, they kind of like the same stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's the thing that I'm so worried about getting lost because we're not doing this stuff in person. But I really can't stress that enough. Like, never mind, like trying to send stuff to me right now. Like send something to like, you know, see, like maybe those short films have a producer. I bet you they all have producers that are looking for material if you haven't made something before. Get in, like when Ron and I, first started working on Hipster and Short Term 12 with Destin, like none of us had made a feature before. When I first met Destin, I said to him, I was like, look, like I've never made anything before. I haven't made a feature before. I've only made short films, but I love what you're doing here. And I really want to go down this path with you. Like, and that was good enough, and I think that there's a real lesson in there. Honestly, like, had I not done that, had I not just reached out to people that were at my level, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to all of you, telling you what to do. So I think there's something really valuable in that. Peers or community is the biggest thing, I think.
I echo that, because I definitely I think it, you have to curate your own kismet, sadly now, like, we don't have the physical like places to do that. But, a lot of the relationships that I now have are from people that, like you say, when we say at your level, it means like, hey, I've been in this for 16 years now. And 10 years ago, like all my pals that were coordinators and managers with me, they're now producers, and we're all trying to climb the ladder together. So, but we've been on the ladder together, and we've held each other up, and some people are getting up the ladder faster. Some are, are not, but we're all in it together. So it's about, in other words, you're weaving your own spider web, rather, be your own spider and make your own web. Don't just try to jump from one to someone else's, like curate that web of network. And, the short films is an amazing way, but also like just anyone that asks me like, oh, I need a producer, I say, well, have you taken a list of film festivals and look at all the first time filmmakers that have gotten into those film festivals and who produced those movies? If you're a first time writer director, that's one way to go about it, because I can bet you they're looking for a second. That's the first thing I tell them to do is that. And, that's homework that you can do with the Google. You don't need to be in New York. You don't need to be in LA. You just need an internet connection and like your little fingers.
That's great. And I really like the, sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ash. Finish.
I was going to say, I've really, there's certain things from doing this remotely that I've really taken away that I've really enjoyed. Like I do, as much as I do love just talking to people and meeting them, like there is something nice about not having to like race all over town to do it. I've been a part of taking out a few projects this year, and we've done pitches on Zoom. I love that I don't have to like sit in a waiting room and like go to a powerful executive's office, that everyone's sort of like democratized at home. And I also love the fact that, filmmakers and have been very creative with using, the ability to put media up on these meetings with pitches, I think, in ways that are really great. And then the last thing I really love is I can see everyone's face, so I know if they're paying attention.
I'll say that, like, as a regional person, like I'm in Tennessee, so just in terms of all of you that are watching that's not in New York and LA, don't get discouraged by your zip code. Sure, like I spent most of building my career in New York, but I'm from North Carolina and then come back to the South, and I've been here in the South since 2015. And what's been interesting during this pandemic is I have found that this Zoom opportunity has reduced like a barrier of entry, because it's strange. Like when I've been putting projects together, and what normally would be like, I'd be lucky to get a conference call with some agent or whatever, or something, like people are like, okay, you want to Zoom? And I'm like, what? You gonna Zoom? Like I get to see who you are, because, most people just know me by like the sound of my voice for a long time. And then they see me, they're like, oh, that voice is coming out of that face. And I'm like, yeah. Now it's like you say, you get to watch them. And I've even had some like pitch meetings that have turned to be very intimate and like emotional, in a sense of like, we're all in our homes and we're just, the barriers are down, and you can really connect with someone. Like I was telling someone a story that I was pitching, and I got emotional. I couldn't help it. And they did too. And here we are. And now it's much more chummy, So I think that, I say that in terms of, for all of you that are out there that are worried about being lonely or out in, a non-production hub, leverage these opportunities and this norm of virtual meetings to do it. And these chat rooms where all of you people, there's now 98 participants right now. And so all of you that are participants, you have the opportunity to make 97 new friends and contacts if you want it. And you all, so rather than thinking about, oh, how can I get to these 4 squares that you're looking at, there's 97 more people that are interested in the same thing you are. So that's like your chair at the film festival, is like these little chat things in there as well.
I love that.
I think it's so great you're talking, Summer, about how you're utilizing, kind of working on your slate and utilizing Zoom. If I could kind of dig deeper in that, like what's been like your strategies during the pandemic, sort of maintaining your slates, and, are certain projects, for instance, that are maybe more COVID friendly? Are those like the projects that you're moving to the top of your slate? Like maybe talk a little bit about the projects that you're working on and how you're maintaining them.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I'm oscillating every day. Like I have one project to where, a year ago, I was having this conversation with the director, literally a year and a half ago. Like we were all gung ho, like we can make this film for like $1 million or maybe even 850. We're trying to go out and do it. And everyone we were pitching going to is like, oh, we don't want to make those little movies. We're looking for something bigger. We're looking for bigger, And so then we recalibrate our whole plans. Like, all right, we're going to make it for, around 3 to 5 million pending cast. So we like totally redid the plan. And now we're back to the other conversation where everyone's like, how can you do it during COVID? And how can you do it teeny tiny? So that's one project conversation that I'm constantly like, yesterday I'm having the like, how can we do it small conversation? And then you have a conversation with your actors or whatever. And, they get all wound up, like, oh, but we can get it for this. So it's a constant, like, you just got to like roll with it. But then on the other token, I am deliberately curating a COVID friendly piece that has nothing to do with COVID, because I'm actually using this as an excuse to like make things the way I actually like to make them, which is very intimate and small. And, as we were talking before the session started, that I feel that there is this kind of bubbling, hopefully resurgent of that guerrilla world, that people might be more accepted. So I feel like you have the opportunity to get a little bit ahead of the curve, because if you think about what's been made in the last year, it's people with a shit ton of money, pardon my language, or this teeny tiny world. And how is that teeny tiny world going to evolve and develop? And that means that audience is going to be willing to accept things that, might have a certain aesthetic or production value, and people have been isolated. So the idea of having like movies that are about small, intimate stories and intimate people might actually connect, because that's what we've all been living with. And so it might be more natural to make that slow progression. So I'm kind of using it as like, I guess as a, springboard to explore how, just really throwing the noodle at the wall about one project to however the hell I can get it made, I'll get it made. And then also using it to maybe get one step ahead of the curve and not be afraid to go back to my roots a little and just focus on telling a good story. Because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was more worried about how am I going to sustain a living and get a project made at a certain level so I can get X salary. Now I'm thinking about, sure, I do need the salary and the bread on the table, but also I'm like, how can I make a really freaking amazing story with as little human possible? So I'm retraining my brain to really just think about story and structure and what at the end of the day, because what I'm finding is as now I'm reading scripts, it's changing how I read things. Because as I read things, I'm seeing like, is that needed? What if that went away? Where's the heart? And it's helping me get to the heart of material more, because I'm really like zoning in on what is this movie about? And at the end of the day, if I had to, film this scene in one shot, how would I do it? Could you do it? These type of things is the way I'm recalibrating how I think about material, which I think ultimately is just going to make me a better storyteller.
Absolutely. Shrihari, I know like, one of the things I've always been amazed by you is sort of your prolificness in terms of like, you're always in production, always making stuff, and being in this situation. Like, what has that been like for you? Have you actually made anything? Could you maybe like, I'm just curious in terms of like what you're working on.
Yeah. I mean, like during COVID, I actually have not shot anything. One from the point of view, just, I don't know, for me, at the start of the pandemic, for me, it just didn't seem crucial that I wanted to put people in harm's way because there was so much unknown. So for me, it was just from an ethical point of view, I didn't want to do anything right away. And then once the safety guidelines kind of started coming around, I did try to set up a project. But last year, I was in an interesting position where I had a film that premiered in Rotterdam, which ended up having a very short festival life because the festivals kind of went away really, and then moved to online. The film that wrapped, and then one film that I was sort of going to go into production with. So there was a lot of different kind of hats that I was wearing because a lot of the films that I produce, I actually also sell them. So it meant a lot of sort of reconfiguring what that meant for the film that I had premiere and the couple of the films that I was selling from the year before. So it was just about recalibrating and understanding how the marketplace was going to support indie films that are quote unquote not A-list star driven in the era of streaming, right? Asher was mentioning, is it a boon for everyone or is it a bane for us, for indie filmmakers? So I think just calibrating on making a film, but also getting it out into the marketplace was sort of the hard thing for me last year. I think one of the reasons I produce films in different countries and different places is because you never know which country is going to get shut down or what might happen. So I like to have things kind of in the works in different time zones, as I say. So right now I'm working on projects that are literally shooting in 5 different time zones. So I'm always communicating with producing partners and writers and directors in different territories. But kind of going back to one of your earlier comments about finding collaborators. So I've made 3 movies with 3 people that I literally met at a film festival party. These movies didn't happen right away. I'll just give you an example. The film that I wrapped last year before the pandemic started was with a filmmaker that I met 10 years ago for the first time. We kept in touch. He pitched me this project in 2014. At that point, the script wasn't ready. So we kind of developed the script a little bit. And then when we felt it was ready, we decided to shoot in 2019. So it took a while. It was someone I met at one event, and 10 years later, I made a movie with them. This has happened to me a couple other times where I've made films with a cinematographer, for instance. I met a cinematographer named David McFarland at Sundance in was it 2013? Yeah, 2013 when It Felt Like Love premiered. We kept in touch. We were just constantly exchanging notes and trying to figure out like what we could collaborate on. This same guy, David, ended up shooting 2 movies for me in 2017, one in the Himalayas in North India and one in West Bank in Palestine in the same year. So again, this is after a gap of 4 years, we were able to find something to collaborate on because of this personal connection that we shared. So I think that's very important, is that I like going after people who I connect with and not so much after their star value or who else they're working with. It's really the personal connection for me that kind of keeps building on in terms of making movies. I did see a question in the Q&A box about how do you find producing partners, and do you usually work with the same producers? So in my case, I actually like to find a producing partner who complements my skill set. For instance, I don't enjoy line producing. So I want to find a producing partner who is good at physical production. So I try to find a producing partner who can complement sort of the lack of skill set that I might have in certain areas, because it only makes the project stronger. If I'm doubling up with the same kind of person like me, like a clone of me, then it's not really going to help us because the project is going to suffer in those areas. So that's sort of my approach in terms of finding producing partners.
I have I have a lot of sayings. Everyone tells me I need to make a coffee table, but I always say, what are you going to bring to the table or take off my plate?
Yeah.
Well, and likewise for me to you,
yeah.
That's finding that complementary skills, but like vision,
yeah,
kind of deal. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Is Ron frozen? I think Ron might be frozen.
Oh no.
Oh man, I thought that there he is. Ron, you were frozen in the most thoughtful pose. You look like you look like an Italian marble statue that was just like frozen, like listening. I couldn't tell.
That's the best compliment I've ever got in my life. Okay. So sort of to go with this, in terms of like, you know, theatrical distribution has changed dramatically in the last year, you know, with so many film festivals online. I'm curious, what is the conversation like right now with private equity folks? Is it, you know, that's such an interesting thing because both of those things are so big to those private equity people. And I'm just curious, because you've had a year to sort of have those conversations, if any of you would like to give a little insight into that.
As it pertains to distribution or just in general with private finance?
I would say as it pertains to getting the money to make your movies. Does anybody, do you feel like investors don't really care? They feel like festivals are on the horizon and distribution is going to come back, or are a lot of people sort of hesitant? I'm curious.
I mean, the question I get really is just people's like, what's your budget with COVID and without?
Yeah.
You know, when's the money in front of the camera and when's it going to COVID stuff, and how does that affect? At least that's the world that I've been in, because I'm so like front loaded in development. I'm sure that my conversations would be different if I had projects that may like was getting to be, I'd be curious if any of you guys had a film like on the festival circuit right when COVID hit. I'm sure that would be the conversation that I'd be like, whoa, what are those people talking about?
I mean, I think, look, I haven't had to navigate this myself, because as I said, I kind of came in under the last seconds before theatrical got a pause put on it. Look, I don't know what's going to happen. My thought is that people are going to go to movie theaters again because we're going to be able to. I don't think that's going away. I do think that streaming is not going away either. And the lack of film festival exposure, I don't honestly think has changed so much the film market. I think the economy getting destroyed and things going more and more streaming is going to destroy the film market, because at the end of the day, those buyers still need to buy movies. They still need to, get stuff from film festivals. I think the thing that's hurt, that if I was a producer with a movie at a festival, the thing that I would be so worried about is if I was going into Sundance and I had, if I was lucky enough, right, to get into Sundance, and like I have a movie and it's with a director who's made, 5 great movies, and this is their little indie they made, and there's a real like big star in it. Like the movie's getting distributed and probably is already distributed by the time it gets to the festival. The thing that I have a concern with in terms of the festivals is like every year that I've ever been, every year, but every festival I've ever been to and like spent real time at, like the movie that's like the biggest movie is never the movie that you would have expected buyers to be excited about going into the festival. And it's because of audiences. And it's because of that reaction. And I think that's the big thing that we've lost in terms of the festival exposure of films is that discovery thing. Because a lot of the movies that will be packaged with cast and, more institutional financiers, et cetera, like those are going to be sold to buyers, like definitely. I would be very scared to take, short-term 12 to film festivals digitally and hope that someone's going to find it the right way. I think that's a daunting reality to face, I think. So I'm eager for film festivals to be back in person. Yeah. I will say this, my last thing, I do hope that the remote access is still something we do, because, and I'm gonna lift something from both an agent said this to me, and Emily Best from Seed and Spark posted something online I read that talked about data, getting data points, like, right? Like as a filmmaker, if I could find out that there's people in Ohio or Florida that are super into my movie because of the data that I've gotten from the film festival, I can use that in conversations with distributors. I think that that's helpful. I also think giving people, democratizing access to films, and I think streaming does this a lot, and something that we miss in the conversation about theatrical is that I think having access to film festivals in such a way remotely helps us build more audiences. I think giving people exposure outside of New York and LA to real intimate cinema is something that's going to be healthy for us eventually. So I do hope we take that away from all of this. I hope that there's a digital component of festivals from here on out, frankly, because of that reason.
Well, let me ask you all this, because it doesn't sound like anyone, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't sound like anyone shot during this last year during the pandemic in this panel. When are you all looking to get back into production? Is there any set date for you all, and what are your thoughts on that? If I could throw that out there.
For me, I mean, I don't have anything that I'm like, this is happening right now. There's a few things that are in development that I think could go this year. You know, I had a conversation on a project recently, and my stance was, you know, post-vaccine. Like, this is a post-vaccine movie, because the kind of movie it is requires us to probably, it should feel regional. And by the way, as an aside, like, I almost will like generalize and say almost every single working, you know, director that came from the indie world in our generation, and we're all making regional films, by the way, in the communities that they were living. Like that is almost 100% the case, you know, including people that are on this panel. Like every single person on this panel made something regionally, really, as their first films. I lost my train of thought now. But no, I think, but yeah, I was having a conversation about, like, if you need to be really intimate, you need to have a lot of people be really intimate. It's gonna be really hard to make that movie right now. So I think there is certain things that I'm thinking about in a post-vaccine world. There's other projects I'm working on, especially stuff in the TV space, that will have much larger budgets that will be able to absorb the added cost. So I've never stopped. In fact, I've been developing without including, that's a question that I've asked a few people, and I'll even throw this out, is like, are you like, what's the world of the stories you're developing, right? If they're contemporary, are they a world in which COVID has taken place or not? Like, that's a question that is sort of esoteric, but I haven't quite faced it yet. I've been working on a few, like, you know, period things, thankfully, but it's a question that's going to come up, you know, eventually.
So
I think. I'm
period
curious,
meaning pre-March 2020? That's period,
yes,
automatically,
no,
right?
That's right. No. No, but truly though, like, if we make something that happens right now, it's like, what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to make like the like quarantine movie. I just chose, I didn't want to do that. But I am curious, like, you know, are people wearing masks in your movie, or does COVID not exist in the world of the film? Like, that's a question, a weird kind of creative question that I've been pondering.
Let me kind of throw it to this, because I want to go to the Q&A shortly. Is there anything that we didn't cover in terms of sort of developing material and just sort of in this time frame that you all would like to share, that perhaps we haven't discussed?
Yeah, I think something to point out, because I think I even saw one of the Q&A questions kind of talked about this, is sort of like, you know, okay, so I have a filmmaker. I did the thing, right? Like, I found someone that wants me to produce their feature, or I found the producer that I want to produce my feature. Now what? You know, what do we do about rights and things? And, you know, there's a lot of great forums online, so far as attachment agreements, shopping agreements. Those are for either material or even just making an arrangement between two parties to be able to say, like, there's an expectation that for this amount of time, I will be able to, as the producer, exclusively try to find both, you know, try to put this movie together financially, put the cast together, et cetera. And there's a lot of those sort of, materials that I don't have a database I could say to look for, but you could Google them, obviously. And likewise, I think one of the other things to think about is, so far as resources are concerned, you know, especially when we get back to being able to be in person again, it's like, look, like, man, I can't afford a lawyer. Well, I got news for you. Most lawyers don't charge by the hour. They charge on commissions. And in fact, if they really believe in a young client, sometimes they'll do work pro bono. So I think like there is a real value in being like, look, like I need someone to, I have a piece of material. I want to find a way to like navigate the world. Like you can reach out to reps outside of agents. Like those aren't the only folks. And if you do reach out to agents, who are the younger agents on teams, right? Like who are the coordinators in departments? Right. Like there are like, I think that what happens is a lot of the times, like people think that they need to go to the top to get the advice and the help. And really you need to get to the person that's just in front of you, that's just ahead of you, because they probably want to be involved with stuff. If you're a young agent, like you're not getting kicked like the dope script, like your boss is going to take that. But if you can find the needle in the hay, like as a young rep, you're going to try to cultivate that person and the people around that project. So I just think that that's something important to kind of mention on this topic too.
I think standing on that too, I think my biggest advice would be, don't be your own worst enemy in terms of being proactive. You know, I tell my story all the time. I grew up on a farm with a dirt road and rented VHS tapes, and that's how I learned about movies. You know, I didn't know anyone. I just knew I wanted to do it. So it's about just being able to say what you want and use the resources, and don't wait for permission. I think that you can I think you curate your own opportunity. Like, yes, I do believe in luck and fate. And, you know, sometimes people just get lucky, and some people get lucky 4 times. And I just want to get lucky, 0.1 time. But you curate your own opportunity. And the way that you do that is you got to put yourself forward and ask questions, even if you don't know the answers. So rather than, wondering how do you do this for an attorney, the easiest thing to do is pick up the phone and call one. And if that person doesn't call you back, call 5 more. Mm-hmm. I knew nothing about making movies. I knew nothing about post-production when I got someone to agree to let me post-supervise a movie. Mm-hmm. I just said, I want to do it because I don't want to leave the movie, but I also want to learn about post. And so I just went and visited every post house. This is the best time to get people on the horn to learn about things you don't know. And that's what I would put forth in terms of developing your material. I would challenge you to also say, okay, for this amount of % of my day that I'm developing my material, what part of my day can I develop myself and my own skills? And how can I do that? Because most of the time you can do that at 0 cost. The Google is free. You can Google and read to your heart's out. And there's so many blogs and opportunities. You don't need a permission to learn and ask questions. So I would think, in terms of my advice, in terms of developing material, is also develop it, be proactive, and develop yourself. And, don't be afraid to ask the questions. I still don't know half the answers to the questions I see here about legal and stuff. God, I don't even know, but I can tell you, I do know how to get the answer. And that's, I think, the most important thing is, are you willing to get the answer, or are you just wanting to ask the question?
I think there's also. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, kind of add to what both of you mentioned, was that if you're not good at a particular skill set, for instance, if you're a director or a producer who enjoys developing the material, but you're not a good writer yourself, seek that collaborator. I would say, don't try to do it yourself. You're not good at it. Find someone who is, and collaborate with them to get them to do their work as best as they can. And it's something I feel like you don't need agents' permissions or introduction from agents to find the next hotshot writer. There are a lot of people who are great writers and who would love to collaborate. And I think the same would go for producers as well. Sometimes it's maybe a little easier to go through a manager because manager is more about the person's career, and agent, in my opinion, is mostly about the money. So I think it's managers might be more approachable in terms of finding collaborators if you are seeking someone who has a manager primarily. And just in our current climate, as you are developing material, one thing that I would put on my sort of budgetary hat on and say that COVID is adding somewhere between 10 to 15% of your budget just for COVID expenditure. So something to kind of keep in mind is that if you are developing sort of a low budget or a medium budget indie film, just keep in mind that about that much of your money will go towards COVID if you're planning to shoot, I would say in 21 or even early 2022. Just something to be aware of.
Great. All right, let's open this up to questions. Let me ask our first question. If you come on to produce a film that you did not originate or that perhaps a director originated, do you always negotiate that you co-own the IP, or do you produce some projects without owning IP? Does anyone want
I've never owned the IP that I've worked on, ever. I've had involvement, and like I said, I think it is, I do this sometimes and sometimes I don't. It really depends on the relationship. But it's never a bad idea, as a lawyer once said to me, for a rainy day to have something in writing. And in the case of, you're working with a writer-director, the writer-director has the material. Unless if you're paying them to write the script, like they're gonna own that IP. But what you could do is you could either handshake, or you can put together, again, you could find this online. There's online templates. It's usually a 1-page document, 2-page document, and there's an attachment agreement that sort of outlines the fact that like you guys have agreed to work on this project. This is what it's called. And you usually put a term length on it. And for this amount of time, we are attached. And if this movie gets made in any capacity, whether I've brought the financing together or not, if it gets made initiated, the making, financing, et cetera, within that term, then I'm protected. And so things are really clear in that regard. And I think most people that are making stuff at their level of like, this is the first few things I'm doing, I think that's probably the most cost-effective and cleanest way to do it if you do want to put something right.
Do you all have to go to sources for funding of your projects? If not, how are you finding out where funding, private or other sources are? So I think that. Go ahead, Shrihari.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's kind of a combination of films. I mean, most of the films that I've put together have been financed through a combination of private equity, tax credit financing, grants, soft money. So it really depends on where the film is being made, what is the kind of content it is, what language it is in my case, and also the budget level. In terms of the private equity itself, I actually do the exercise of going through IMDb Pro and looking at all the executive producers that are on all the different kinds of movies. And if I have a person, again, because now on IMDb, you can find a mutual connection, which is pretty amazing, is that you can find how you are connected to this person. So that's a good way to kind of find out who some financiers are. And going back to the 6 degrees of separation, that's another thing. It's like my first few films, I used the sort of the spider web strategy of raising money, was getting 5 people on board, then getting them to get at least one more person on board and just kind of collecting the money that way. And I think on the first couple of features, that usually is good because you're not convincing someone to come in for a lot of money into one project. And that way, if you're able to recoup their money, their investment, they might be more than likely to come on board your next project. Or even if you recoup half their investment, if they had a good time on your film, it's quite likely that they will come back and invest in your next project. So I think it's a lot of different ways of raising money. In the larger budget indies, I would say 3 to 5 million or more, you go to production companies that have funding attached to them. You go to film funds that have strict mandates, or we only want to invest in BIPOC content. We only want to invest in female director content. So just based on the kind of movie you're making, you kind of try to target those companies and those funds.
You could kind of like seek out like who the financier is. Like you could kind of figure it out on IMDb because they're usually an executive producer, or or maybe they are a producer, but you can kind of usually look at their credits, or maybe even the company, and just kind of see what their involvement is. And you're sometimes able to figure out like who the financiers are. I've worked for an entity one point that had financing, and that was awesome because we got to like greenlight stuff, and that was like the coolest thing. Most of the time I've always been looking for money. So, but I do think there's a point in that, which is, I know this is a difficult thing to say because I just want everyone to be artists and make stuff. But like, I kind of learned all that stuff and I got the access to knowing who to reach out to because I was working, because I got a job, because I was an assistant. You know, I knew that as someone who wanted to make stuff, no one was ever going to give me the chance to make anything. So I was going to have to make it. You know, that's like the number one thing. You got to fucking make stuff. Like you can't like wait for anyone to give it to you. You know, be Summer, be Shree, make movies, like be Ron. Like you just got to go make stuff. But a lot of the access that I've gotten in my career through representatives, through the more like traditional kind of, you know, industry was because I was working in it, because I got a job, because I found I worked at an agency as an assistant, and then I got a job in an indie film finance and packaging company as an assistant, and I got promoted there. That's how I met Shree, was because I reached out because I wanted to represent. It felt like love for domestic sales, and they passed on me. But what I did do was I got to Sundance, and I went to every party looking for Eliza Hittman because I wanted to meet this director who I thought was so fantastic in this movie. And lo and behold, I would consider Shree a friend, and I would help Shree out at any time that he ever needed anything. Call me. I'd be like, yeah, what advice would you need? And likewise, he would do the same for me because we made that connection through work. Essentially, I was getting paid for that. So I do think, like, depending on where you are in your career, it's not a bad idea to try to get a job that's putting you in connection to at least the part of the business that you want to learn. Like that's, and honestly, like that's how I got a lot of the knowledge I have, is because I fucking answered people's phones for a long time, you know? And I think that there's a benefit to that at the end of the day.
Another question. How do you recommend finding regional producers outside of LA or New York?
Same way you find the ones in LA and New York.
Yeah.
Same way. You know, the zip code doesn't define the strategy, only your ingenuity. So, you know, your research of it. You know, look at, there's also the same labs there's labs that are regional specific too. There's like the Southern Producers Lab, you know, New Orleans, there's film societies is another
Austin,
word you can look for. Austin, you know, anywhere, you know, you can look and see, well, who are attending those labs and who are in those festivals. And then also doing your cross-reference work of what producers are participating in all these magic labs we speak of. Google and find out where they're from, because I bet you money they're not from New York and LA, not all of them. I mean, you know, when I went to the Sundance Labs, there was 5 of us. Yeah, 2 New York, 1 LA, 1 Texas, 1 Tennessee, 1 North Carolina. So, you know, and all those people are still my dearest friends. And that's how you kind of find them, is the same way. You know, I think that I love that everyone's thinking about, you know, being regional and how that is kind of a term that you use to define yourself. And that's great, but don't use it as a term to limit yourself. And that's the thing, you know, if it defines part of your artistry, great, but don't let it define your opportunity, because it doesn't have to. If anything, use it to your advantage. I mean, don't get me wrong. I definitely played the Southern card many a time, because it's actually is what gotten me jobs, because what has done it is I have made my career helping people make films in places where films aren't usually made. Because I was, you know, from North Carolina, I was the girl that learned how to like spend money and do things. You could drop me anywhere in the United States and I could figure out how to make a movie, because I can rent trucks, I can find a camera, and I can blah, blah, blah. I can do it, but I can also talk to the dude at the gas station. So, I mean, you again, just get out there, be bold is what I would say, and aggressive in terms of curating these relationships. Most of our career and the things that we're talking about that we've done in our careers, all 4 of us, is because we've curated relationships and opportunities. We haven't waited for them or waited for some magic answer. It's just about curating it.
Yeah, I think what Summer mentioned is great. I mean, every major city or a nearby major city has a film organization. either a film commission or a film organization, like all over the US, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't have a producer's workshop or a lab, I'm sure they have monthly mixers, or I'm sure they have some kind of online event right now in terms of getting their membership together. I think that's a really good place to meet people. Maybe there will be a person who hasn't produced a feature, but they are very well established in producing industrials and commercials. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good way, because that's going to excite them too, because they might want to make a feature as well. So I think it's a good way to bring a collaborator on board from within your community who is willing to and wanting to kind of take that journey with you. I mean, there's San Francisco Film, SF Film, there's the New Orleans Film Society, there's IFP Chicago, Austin Film Society, Nantucket Film Festival. Like, there's a lot of community film organizations throughout the U.S.
But then there's also, right, there's Women in Film, there's Film Fatale,
exactly.
right? There's like, there's so many groups. I mean, frankly, like, go look at who's like on the sponsors list of like Film Independent, like Forum Week, and you'll see a lot of these groups attached. Or I think so. I think there's something that, again, like, I just want to throw it out again, like, you know, everyone on this Zoom made regional films technically, right? Ron, first feature was in San Diego. Where did you, in Echo Park? You shot it at your house, right? Like, you know, Summer, you've just sold us on how you've made a career in making things in places that are unsuspecting. Shri, like, you're a different animal. Like,
my first feature,
you're a superhero guy. Like,
my first feature was in Indiana, in Indianapolis and Broad Ripple. I went from India to Indiana to make a movie.
Right. and I would, by the way, I would say really statedly that It Felt Like Love is a regional film.
It's regional.
Right?
It's very specific to a neighborhood in Brooklyn. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's right. I just like hammer that home, man.
Yeah.
I think this goes a little to that, and I thought this is an interesting question. As a writer-director, moving from shorts into a first feature, what would you look for in upcoming producers at my peer level, i.e., how do you know someone who produced a great short would be good on a feature?
Spidey sense.
Well, here's my thing.
No, go ahead, Ron.
No, you go, Ash.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's, I think there's a little bit of a shot you take when you jump into something with someone. You'll never know what it's like to make something with them until you've done it. Some people have great experiences with certain people and have bad experiences with the same person. Like, it varies. Honestly, what I look for is it's almost like, it's like dating, right? It's like, is there chemistry here? Is there not? Like, do I find myself an easy person to talk to? I think people are pretty good at like being like, clouding themselves and like being snaky, but I think people are pretty clear on who they are, if you pay attention. And I think it's really important, if you're a writer director, is have them tell you about your project. Like, ask them questions about your project. What do they see? What are the important things? What are the thematics, right? And hopefully you hear stuff that helps you, that opens things up. And if it doesn't, if it scares you, or if you don't like it, if it rubs you the wrong way, it's probably giving you good insight as to whether or not this person is going to be a good partner. I think someone who can be really, like, I'd rather work with someone, if I was like putting myself in those shoes, I'd rather work with someone who like is being really honest about the level of experience they have and about the obstructions in front of them, than someone who is going to drop a lot of names. I think someone who answers you specifically is someone to pay attention to in a producer. Someone that kind of just runs their mouth. We like talking, obviously, so that's a hard part to avoid. But I do think that there's a value in just listening closely. Is, again, the specificity with which they answer things, and look for a projection of insight into the project, in a way that you feel like they get it. And I think if someone gets it, they're honest and they're willing to put in the work. That's a great partner to have, because you could always build people on. You could always get someone like Shri to help you put together the like finance plan. And you could always find, you know, someone like me that likes talking to agents, or you can find someone like Summer that might have experience with physical production in a way that she feels really confident to oversee a line producer. Like, you could always bring those people on, but finding someone that you can just be a real comrade with is something that is I think it's the first thing you should look for, frankly.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think sometimes like when people are making that jump from short to feature, they're always, you know, wanting to reach out to someone much bigger than them. And sometimes you do need to look at your peers because they're the ones that are in the trenches with you. They're the ones that want to move up with you. So, you know, especially if and I think that's a great opportunity for you to see how you all work together, is make a short together. Make a short, see what the relationship is like. Sure. Are there learning curves to making a feature? Absolutely. But it's basically making a really long short. You know, if you've made some beautiful shorts together, odds are they can learn the steps necessary to making a feature, and they will actually want to put in the time and the sweat equity to come up with you. Some of us have done, like, I've made that $65,000 feature. And if you're like telling me, hey, do you want to make like a micro budgeted feature with me? I'm like, it's a hard thing for me to go back to be quite frank. And so sometimes I'm like, look at the people around you and the people that want to come up, and those relationships are important, and you need to build those. Let me see.
Yeah, I think talking to collaborators also, definitely, I would say talk to the collaborators of that producer on the short that they did to find out their strengths and weaknesses, you know, and if that's something that works for you, I think is a good way to kind of proceed with what Asher was mentioning. Is are they a good collaborator for you after they have told you your film, you know, what your film is? Are you on the same page? I think that's very important as well.
I also think it's probably corny, but you know, I did a stint having a real job between 2015 at a Fortune 50 company, you know, building out a studio. And it was the first time in my career that I really went through like performance management and feedback. And I mean that in a sense of, I managed sets, 1,500 people. But when you're in a corporate setting, it's like you sit in a room and they're like, you know, what are your goals? What do you want to improve? What's your weaknesses? And you really like, what's your emotional intelligence? And I learned so many words that I was like, oh my God, I don't know. What is my emotional intelligence? And learning about myself. And I took that and I've now applied it to the way I enter into relationships, because I have had some experiences that I would prefer not to replicate. And I've had some experiences that I would die to replicate again in terms of beautiful collaborations. And what I wish I would known then that I know now is I would ask questions like, what do you want out of this experience? What would you do? What do you want? Because you need to know what are people's and I don't mean motives as in like, oh, how they're going to get you. I mean, like, what is it that they want out of this experience? But also I would challenge you to learn, like, what would you like to do on this film that you couldn't do on the others, or that you weren't able to? Like, what opportunity do you have to grow? Like, I even am using that phrase with, you know, those people that I speak of that I reach out to flattery and like saying, hey, what else do you want to do? Because I'm curious to see you grow, because obviously you can do these things. What do you want to do next? How can we take this leap together so that at the end of the day, we're both progressing ourselves in some way that we want, not just, hey, writer, director, producer, will you get my movie made for me? Will you raise me X amount of dollars? It's like, look at it as a real partnership, because your goal as a writer, director is probably to make another film. Well, what is that producer? Are you looking at them just to be your martyr or your partner? Well, if they're your partner, then you want them to elevate too, because if they can get your movie made now, they might can do it again. And if you work well together, man, what a relationship to have as someone that wants to help you succeed. So find that place, like mutual progression is the best way to, you know, go, and that you're a team in your successes as well as your failures and improvements.
Shrihari, I think there's a question that you wanted to field. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a question from TJ DeRosa about appropriating lyrics from a sci-fi-esque song to making a short film. I think the specific answer for that would be, it really depends on what the Creative Commons license that you mentioned attributes. So I would get an opinion from a fair use lawyer who understands the Creative Commons licenses to see if that would work within the kind of content that you're looking to make. And also, there might be certain restrictions in terms of commercial viability, using it for commercial purposes versus you using it under a different Creative Commons license. So the Creative Commons license doesn't give you license to do whatever you want. There are certain reuse attributes that come along with it. So that's something that you would need to talk to a fair use lawyer who understands the Creative Commons licensing in order to be able to appropriate it to the format that you want to work in.
I'm going to be a little more cowboy about it. I think that exact question, because the question was basically, there's a song that I want to base I think it was a short film even off of, and that inspired the short film. Honestly, it depends on the content. Like if it's literally the exact, like if the song, I don't know what the song is, if the song like lays out a story and you tell that story on film, yes, you need to do everything that Shree just said. If you want it to inspire your story, you do not. And I think you probably have to make a little bit of a judgment call on that. But there is a murky area there where, there's been many films that have been made by people being influenced by plays, by other movies, right? So there is that's the nature of art. And so there is a little bit of elasticity you probably have to just do it without getting those permissions, so long as you make it enough your own. If you did say want to use that song, there are a lot of publishers will give some sort of festival licensing, so that you can probably either pay very little or almost nothing to be able to like put that song in your short or even your feature for festivals. The tricky part is that so much goes online. And if you wanted to have it play on a non-protected environment or be able to play at South by Southwest online or Sundance online or, wherever else, you're going to run into issues with that. So that's probably where you're going to need to get a direct permission, is if you use the actual song or needle drop, is what we'd say.
Hold on one second. Shrihari, how do you manage to have so many projects in production at the same time? As an indie producer, is it better to focus on one project at a time?
I think one of the reasons I have multiple projects, like I think everyone here has multiple projects. The main reason being, you don't know when the movie is going to go. So if you only have one project that you're working on, you're probably not going to get paid for a few years. So that's one of the reasons that I have multiple projects in different stages. Some are literally at an idea stage, some are at treatment, some are at script. I mean, my goal when I started producing was almost about 11 years ago now, was to have one movie shooting every year, one movie releasing, and one in prep. So that was sort of my goal. I tried to meet it. In some years, I had 0 movies, and then in other years, I had 3 movies shooting the same year. So it just kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit, but I think it's very important to have multiple projects in different stages. I think having multiple projects in the same stage would be really hard, because then your attention is getting kind of crazy and divided, and then all your projects suffer a little bit. But if the projects are in shooting, that's the project that gets my most attention. And then the project that's in its idea or treatment stage will kind of fall to the 3rd tier, so that I can focus on the project that's actually happening right now. And I think it's very important to have those multiple projects. I'll just give you an example. The film that I shot in 2017 in the West Bank was supposed to be my second feature as a producer. Between 2010 and 2017, I made 10 movies. So if I hadn't made any of those 10 movies, I wouldn't have gotten paid. So that's the reason. It's just that project took 7 years to finance, So I think it's very important to have a lot of irons in the works, especially if you're working in the indie space, so that you have something going in order to earn a living as you continue to work on your passion projects.
I think the only caveat that I'd throw out, and Shri, tell me if I'm wrong, but I do think that if it's your first feature, I think scaling back how many things you're working on is
for
really
sure.
important. Just get that done.
Yeah.
I think this will be our last question. What is the best way to protect my content in early pitches to potential collaborators? Anybody want to take that?
Spidey sense. I mean, really, like spidey sense, like you just go on instinct. If you feel weird talking to somebody about something, you don't have to tell everybody everything, you know, to be honest. I mean, you don't, and you don't have to show everyone the lookbook if you don't feel like the conversation goes well, and you don't have to share everyone the script. Just because somebody asks you for something doesn't mean you have to give it to them at all. I mean, otherwise, like, I don't know legally, like, sure, you can copyright your material, you know, you can watermark things. You can, you know, make sure to password protect any type of mood reel in Vimeo and change your password regularly. So there are definitely standards of practices of regular behavior you can do to protect that. That's, you know, kind of one way, but also I just want you to know that that you have the permission to protect it at a very literal level in terms of, to me, when I protect material, I protect it as in, where do I let it get out to? To me, that's protecting it, because it keep it close to the vest. So that's one way that I protect material, is that I'm very strategic about when I send things out, and it has to be ready to be sent out, because when I send something out, I want to rock and roll with it. I don't want it to be out a little bit here, a little bit there. Like, I want it to have momentum. So when I protect material, my protection is deciding the time in which I put it out is the way I protect material.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, if it's an idea that's a little bit harder. You can't copyright ideas and things, right? This is the whole thing we hear a lot is but also, like, you know, whether it's using the free that's not free, but whether it's using the I meant that you don't have to be a member, but the WGA script registry. I think Summer makes the right point of, like, you can watermark people's names on material that you send to them, etc. I will say this, like, I think in the age of email record and text and all that stuff, like, you know, like, it's pretty easy to put together a paper trail to show how you met someone, when you met them, what you talked about, and what it was. Like, I think getting too caught up in being worried someone's going to steal your idea falls in the same pot, for me at least, as oh, I don't think it's good enough yet. Like, I think it's an excuse that we kind of give ourselves to hide stuff a little bit because we're a little bit afraid to share. And I think one of the other things is the principle of, like, it's not going to be your last idea. You're going to have many ideas. If this is your one idea, you should go do something else. Like, I think it's definitely good to be protective of things. And there's stuff that I'm working on that, like, I haven't told anyone that I'm working, like, for certain reasons, because you want to be able to, like, be strategic as to when you share stuff, to the point that Summer made. But yeah, I think don't get too neurotic about it, because you'll end up like me. But don't be too neurotic about sharing your work, because it's the only way to get it made.
1 second here. Paul. Let's see.
Yeah, we are, I think, out of time. We have a lot of questions here. I'm sorry we don't have time to get to all of them. But yeah, we hit the 90-minute mark, and that's we do have to wrap up. So before we go, I want to thank our fantastic group of producers here for joining us from across the country and sharing such great wisdom. Asha Goldstein. Asha, good to see you. We'll see you soon. Shrihari.
Cheers.
Sathe. Thanks, Shrihari.
Thanks, Paul.
Summer Shelton in Tennessee.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
And our fantastic moderator, Ron Najor. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you guys for doing this. It's very kind of you to take your time to do it. We really appreciate it.